Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friend, Dr. Curt Thompson.
And my friend, Pepper Sweeney.
We are here to discover and explore what it means to be truly known. Curtis Ring Thompson, MD, in the house.
Oh
my
dude.
Gosh. I tell you what, it's second best because last week, the episode that you all heard, and to us in real time here, last week we were actually together in a room with many of you recording a live version of the Being Known podcast. And it was off the charts amazing. It was the most fun.
Man.
It was, we had 500 of you in the room with us. And, oh my gosh. First of all, some things to note, like when some of you would come up and say, oh, when you told that story, I'd be like, oh my gosh, what did I say? Because we do this recording and it's just me and Curt having a conversation. I'm in my little basement closet studio that I built out, and Curt's in DC. We're just having a conversation. And then, someone says, when you told that story, it was impactful. And I'm thinking, okay, I need to rethink what I'm sharing on this podcast, because you forget what you're doing. And yeah. Man. So, and this season, by the way, let me just say this before you jump in, Curt. This season, we are talking about rupture and repair. And this is a topic that I am all in on in so many ways, and I'm excited about. And I'm excited about how hopeful I am for some change that I think can happen in me and in my life, and for you, our listeners as well, the most beautiful listeners in the world.
Right on.
We never did decide. There were votes that were taken last season, and we never did fully decide what that was going to be. There were quite a few suggestions as to what we are to call you. And especially now that we've spent time with you in person, it makes me feel like we should be calling you something. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Oh, the most beautiful listeners in the world. I love that. That's amazing. Man, dude, it is so good to be back doing this together. Our first recording was, truly with everybody in the room, both in person but also virtually. Having that felt sense of energy and presence, support. I love that all three of us, you, Amy, and myself, were able to kind of live off of for that hour. The presence of others that were in the room. And I felt like even though the three of us were on stage, everybody was in the podcast.
Yes.
Everybody was. And I'm also really grateful for our opportunity to do this particular work as we are hearing this podcast. We're hearing it after the 2024 election.
Correct.
And so we know that there will be lots of stories that we are telling and making up in our heads. There are lots of stories that are being written in the paper and that we hear online, that we read about online, that we hear on the radio and the television and so forth, and so much of our lives are wrapped up with what this question of like, what do we do with all the ruptures that we encounter? And as it turns out, in earlier seasons, we've talked about this notion of rupture and repair as part of other seasons, but we haven't really paused and said, we're going to drill, 10 stories underground to go after this. This one of the ways I like to think about working through rupture and repair is this notion that one of the things that we're trying to do is to reimagine the world as it really is. as it really, really is. And our listeners might be thinking, like, I don't like, what do you mean as it really is? Like, you look around at the world and it just seems like one cascading rupture after another, without a lot of evidence of repair work being done. Like, I don't want to imagine that world. And what I mean by the world as it really is, if you imagine that word really is with a capital R, I think about this notion that, when Jesus talked to his followers, he would sometimes talk in the language of, what particular age they occupied. And he would say things like the age to come, this present age, or the age to come. And the age to come began on Easter Sunday. It began on Easter Sunday. And so we are in the foothills of the age to come. And that is the most real world, this age to come. It is Jesus' kingdom that is coming in its fullness. And it is a kingdom that is all about repairing ruptures. This primary moment of repair that takes place on Good Friday and moving through Holy Saturday and erupting literally from the earth on Easter. This is the world that really is most real. And I want our listeners, I want me to begin to pay more and more attention to that real world. And therefore, what's the implication when it comes to repairing ruptures? And I think we'll find over the course of our conversation that certainly I love the idea of the kingdom of Jesus coming in its fullness, except where I don't. And as it turns out, there are, I think, things that we're going to discover that Jesus is asking us to do, things that he's asking us to become as repairers of ruptures. This takes us back to the whole notion in the Old Testament of Nehemiah. He's going to repair the breach in the walls. He's going to repair ruptures of Jerusalem's walls. That we are being called. We are finding ourselves in places where we as Jesus followers are here to identify and to name that there are ruptures in the world, and that we want God to repair them within us and between us and others, so that we can also be avenues of repair of those ruptures in the world. We're going to, over the course of, the next several episodes, we're going to just bear in mind that, over the last several years, there's just been a greater sense of fragility and a lessening of resilience. And in our culture in the West, we hear about it, we write about it, and so forth and so on, and so we hear these stories, and it's easy for us to feel that and believe that. We can act as if that is the case, and that then leads to our imagination's atrophy, our capacity to imagine that ruptures will be repaired, that we can be avenues of that we can be agents of that repair, because we hear the word tribulation in John 16:33 when Jesus says, "In this world you'll have trouble, you'll have tribulation, there will be ruptures." But we forget what follows that, and so therefore be of good cheer. It's not easy for me to imagine the be of good cheer part, and so it's increasingly difficult for me to access the God of the Bible, and so it's hard for me to imagine what it means to bear his image, because in the real world of Jesus' kingdom, being an image bearer means I am a rupture repairer. I didn't mean to make that rhyme, but I mean,
Right.
And so, in our practice, we see this, we read about this as well. There are these increasing rates of depression and anxiety and loneliness, all of which are implications of our underdeveloped and our atrophied imaginations when it comes to repairing ruptures. Because to repair them, we must first imagine doing it. And with no imagination to do it, we never attempt it. And not only this, but these are features that are not just about my individual life, who experiences an unrepaired rupture, and I've got a list of those things. But it's also a feature of this corporate social structure that we live in, that we tell ourselves about. So, for instance, when we read the Hebrew Bible, when we read the biblical narrative, you might wonder, like, why are we talking about Leviticus and Numbers? Like, yeah, two of my favorite books in the Bible,
Yes.
Leviticus and Numbers. But one of the things that we recognize about, like, Leviticus, it is a book that is all about God, through Moses, training the nation of Israel, training a corporate body of people to collectively do the work of repairing ruptures. This is what they're doing. He's getting them ready. He's helping them practice learning how collectively together, not just as individuals, but collectively, they enter into practices that help them frame how we become and how they were to become who they were becoming as individuals, but all as a function of who they were becoming corporately as a system. And so I have to recognize this, as we're going to talk about this going through our time together, that, like, when our listeners, you're like, yeah, I got a list of the people that I've had ruptures with, whether that's, and I'm, generationally, my parents or my siblings or individuals, I can think about that. But we sometimes forget that how I'm responding to that is not just my own personal response, but it is the way that I have been formed and shaped to respond by a particular system. And the system itself is a ruptured system that has a hard time playing the role of repairer in the world. And part of what God was doing in Leviticus and then sending the people out toward Palestine in the book of Numbers is he's sending them to become a nation that repairs the world. But it's really hard for us to do this as individuals because, like, as it turns out, like, they really had a hard time doing it. It was just like one rebellion after another, right? They were having trouble, like, doing the Levitical thing, even after they got invited to do it. And so we're going to learn over the course of our time that we effectively are formed into repairers of ruptures in the context of community. It's where I learn to do it because I learn as we learn together. So it's also true that we thought, go ahead. Go.
As we're starting this season, one thing that I've been doing in my work community is trying to create a culture of rupture and repair within the company, and it's been really interesting. And we have these once a week short meetings where I'm asked to share some kind of whatever inspiration of some kind or whatever. And I've been concentrating on this rupture repair thing because I think it's so important, and to be doing it in community and to be aware of, I've got something here I need to repair. I have something, it just changes. It kind of changes everything, right? If you're thinking of, if you're looking for those things that need to be repaired. And so I think it's fascinating to hear you talk about this idea of communal rupture and repair, where it all started there. It's just it's affirming for me, and it's really, really cool to hear.
Yeah. Well, we've okay, wait. Maybe you can come back to it, but, like, do you have an example?
So there's a lot of examples. There's an example that I shared immediately with the entire team, a rupture that my boss and I had. There were some things that had happened that basically triggered me, and I had to look at those triggers and realize that I wasn't really being triggered by her necessarily as much as I was these things that I walked in the room with, right? So what was some things that she was doing were triggering these things. We had there was a rupture there that took place, and so I went back to her and I said, "Look, you need to know why I reacted the way I did." And it had very little to do with what you were saying. It had so much to do with all of these other things in my, but to be able to go through that exercise, to be able to go through, to talk to her about what she had said, what had happened, for her to take ownership in some of the ways that she was saying things, and then for us to go to the team and reenact this in front of them, opened up big conversations, and it was so it's that kind of thing that we're doing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think I just think about the you've kind of like in some respects you've kind of provided a little bit of an outline of some things that we're going to cover. So at one level, you're aware that there are certain things about your own experience in life that get activated when your boss says or does something.
Right.
And you could have said, well, I'm aware enough to know that these things that these responses that I have are not so much about my boss. They are about, these other parts of my story. And you could have said nothing to her.
Right.
But the reality is that at the same time that they primarily have their history in your earlier life experience.
Yes.
They do necessarily involve her.
Yes.
She's not she's not the origin of these things, but she's not uninvolved.
Yes.
And the beautiful thing that I love about your story is that part of the challenge is that if you don't do what you did, then one of the things that our neural networks, that our memory tracks will do, is that they will begin to tell a story in which we weave her into being part of the origin of that story.
Exactly.
Because we have a memory of a moment in which I associate a particular interaction with this particular person that re-evokes and strengthens that old thing within me. And the beauty of your coming to find her, we'd say this is echo of Eden. Dude, in some respects, if you're the party that is harmed, this is in some respects, we like to think that, God made the world, he set Adam and Eve up, and it's a pretty simple thing, just don't eat that one tree, and God's going to stand off in the background, he's going to watch what happens and see how they do, and then give them their grade report at the end of the semester. And it turns out they fail the test badly, and it's a pretty simple test as it turns out. And then God comes walking, and it's like he's the teacher who's coming into the room to hand them their F on their paper. We don't have any sense. There's nothing within us that would ever imagine that their behavior would wound him. That their behavior would hurt him. That he could feel anything. We just see God as this rather inert creator that walks into the garden, and he might be pissed, he might be upset with them for their disobedience, but the whole notion that he might, I don't know, some version of wince, some version that he would feel grief, maybe. Because the writers tell us only a few chapters later in Genesis that he was grieved in his heart that he had made humankind. And this is the first rupture for him. As if they're the only ones who are affected. Not the case. He comes looking for them. You come looking for your boss.
Yeah.
We're gonna have this conversation, and then that you have this conversation, and then you bring this to the staff, because here's the other reality: there's no way that your staff is not affected by this downstream.
Exactly, and
in both cases.
Yes, and that's the unforeseen beauty that because when I went to her, I didn't have a plan of, hey, let's take this back to the team, and but then we started talking about rupture and repair, and it's we all need to hear this. We all need to see this, and this is what
Right.
Yeah, it's been great.
Right. And it reminds me of we've talked about this before when we did a season on confessional communities, and how we have these different phases of development of the communities, and this notion of first the first phase is we kind of talk about things that are outside, and then phase 2 we get connected. We feel like we realize we're not by ourselves. And so I feel connected with other people as we talk about things that are outside of the community. And then once we are connected enough, we find that we start to do things that hurt other people's feelings or that disappoint people or that whatever. Because we become increasingly real. And the parts of me that I don't like show up in the room and the parts of others show up in the room. And we discover that, oh my goodness, right here in this space, things are starting to happen. And when we get to the point where we are repairing ruptures between community members, we know that we have hit the depth of the vein in the gold mine. Mm-hmm. Like it is pure gold, baby. And of course, the people in the room are thinking like, that's a crock of horse hooey. This is not what we signed up for. I thought I was coming to a confessional community in order for me to feel better, in order for me to be healed. I didn't come here to have more ruptures. No, you came here to practice learning what it's really like when ruptures happen, how to repair them in real time and space.
Yeah, I mean, putting yourself in a situation where you're going to be in any community is putting yourself in a situation where there's going to be ruptures.
Yeah.
I mean, wherever two or more are gathered, there are ruptures.
Right. There are ruptures.
Right.
Yeah, right, right. You will have tribulation, and you will be that tribulation for each other. That's right. You will have trouble, and that trouble's name is Sarah or Bill, the one who's sitting with you in the pew.
Or you.
You will be your trouble. Yeah, right on. Yeah. And so like I'm just imagining in your work, in your workplace, that having that space where you're gathering with the staff, like can you imagine? Like these people, if any of these people are churchgoers, it's not very likely that any of them are seeing, like, it's not like the pastor brings up one of the associate pastors and, has a moment with the congregation and says, we need to let you all know that we've had a rupture this week that we've worked out.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about it. Can you believe it? Can you imagine this?
Yeah.
I mean, like Dallas Jenkins, I mean, he'd want to be like filming this for the, for the chosen. He'd be like, oh my gosh, this is like real time, real stuff.
Yeah.
Right? This whole notion of what we're about. And so I love that real time example. And of course that you're talking about. And of course, like it's not like it's unnerving to begin the process.
It is.
And so to our listeners, we're not saying like, oh, this is a walk in the park. This should be no problem. If you're feeling nervous or anxious about this, like, no, like you shouldn't be like, yeah, of course we're anxious. Because we're not stupid. Right? I already got my nose punched once by this person. Like, why would I want to come back in the room and like, why would I do that?
Right.
Yeah. But we are so ill practiced at this. We don't see a lot of that, like in our kitchens, let alone in the public sphere of a workplace. And so we just think about where we find ourselves explicitly in our moment, right? Our social and political landscape. We have been formed over the last probably 20 years, maybe more, but probably longer than that, to think of others in terms of others.
Right.
Right? They are not only just different from me. Oh, I'm separate from Pepper. But like, no, if you're not thinking exactly like I think, there's already ruptures that are taking place in my head between me and you. So we maintain our distance. And so we maintain our ruptures that we create in our own minds. And, I've shared here that, back, I don't know how long ago it was, which season it was. We talked about like I had to create a list of people that I need to forgive, and I need to work. And I'm still working through that list, by the way. And also, just like you're not on the list yet. So I'm just.
I'm on the waiting list.
I'll let you know.
I'm on the waiting list.
I'll let you. That's right. You're on the wait list. On the list. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But I mean, I'm still on the I hold a grudge list. I'm waiting to graduate to the forgiveness list. As long as I'm on the list,
okay.
Somewhere.
Yeah. And so, we collect these things. And because I don't see my pastor and the associate pastor or two deacons or an elder, because I don't witness this in real time and space, Yeah,
And I was going to say, and and because we don't witness it, that's part of the reason why we have this atrophied imagination. Because how can you imagine? I mean, you can't imagine it because it's never it's never been around. Nothing. There's no inkling of it. So if we don't practice it, others in our lives can't even imagine it. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so all we're pretty much left with are, variations on a theme. Right? We have various ways that we're then going to. What we do is that we do imagine ourselves into ruptures. Like a rupture happens, and then we take that rupture and we extend it and we expand it. And so, especially like so. For instance, there are trends regarding even our response to the notion of a thing we call church. It is fashionable and easy to say things like, well, the church treats fill in the blank with disdain, or the church has not been kind to this group for it's just easy and fashionable for us to say this. When we talk about the notion of deconstruction. Deconstruction itself is a way in which people are trying to make sense of their stories, but I can guarantee you that no small part of what it means to deconstruct faith, however that is emerging, and some of our listeners, I would hope that some of our listeners, maybe many of our listeners, are people who find themselves in that space of deconstruction. I would hope that they are, because I want to say to you, there is durable hope waiting for you. Because no small part of deconstruction, no small part of what some will be calling church hurt, no small part of it is all about unrepaired ruptures that involve particular people with particular events that entangle Jesus or the Bible or some abstract notion of a thing that we call church in the middle of this. And those things, I would say, are taken advantage of and are hijacked by unclean spirits. I mean, I'll just say it right there. Me, the psychiatrist, the guy who thinks about the brain and so forth. Like, yeah, I believe that there are unclean spirits that are as real, actually more real than the room I'm sitting in, that are going to take advantage of the parts of us that are feeling vulnerable and tender, and where there have been ruptures that have been unrepaired. Because, as you just said, because we don't see it practiced, we don't know what repair. Like, you can't even imagine that. And all this continue, and these things continue to happen because we keep our distance from those with whom we have had a rupture. I can tell any story I want to tell about you, as long as I never talk to you,
right?
And I can make it all up,
right?
And yeah, and I would say that some features that are common to these trends, even when it comes to those of us in the community of faith, a lot of it has to do with just our response to grief. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk eventually in our episodes about what a rupture actually looks like, what it means neurobiologically, how it shows up in the biblical narrative, all those kinds of things. But one of the neuroaffective elements of it is grief. This sense of loss, this sense of rending, we could come up with a number of words that are all sitting within the place, this placeholder that we call grief. We in the Soul of Desire, we talk about we are a people of great longing. We long for connection.
Right.
And I long for connection with the people who are not like me. Because if it's somebody who's not like me who wants to be with me, dude, you can't, that's money.
Yeah.
But I'm also a person of grief. We are a person of great desire, and we are people of great grief. And that affective state makes us more fragile when it's kind of like, we've said here before, you got to pick up a 5-gallon bucket of water. That's not that hard to do, but then you got to carry it for 10 miles. That's, the bucket gets heavier and heavier with every step, even though the weight doesn't change, because my system is having to be taxed, all the energy I have to go to cope with that, to contain all that. And if my ruptures have not been repaired, I get weaker and I get tireder and more and more exhausted carrying them around. And so I become more fragile because I'm afraid. I'm afraid to step into it because I feel less and less courageous in order to do so. And no small part of that, you really, as we'll talk in detail, is that as it turns out, we don't recognize that many of the ruptures that we encounter involve the violence that we commit toward ourselves in the privacy of our own mind. Now, there's something for us to think about, because we can, we might say, we gave people some homework assignments after our first episode, and one of those assignments was, of course, to consider where, what would it be like for you to begin to look for ruptures that you can repair, but also what happens when we start to list the ruptures that are in our mind. And my guess is that if you were to list the top 3 or 5 ruptures that you can come to your mind, my guess is for most of us, we would not list in that list the things that we've done to ourselves. But most of the ruptures that we encounter, by far, involve the story of violence that I tell to myself about myself. And about the time we start to wake up to this reality, that, for instance, your repair of your rupture with your boss is as much about undoing the story that you want to tell in your head about yourself.
Totally.
As it is.
Yeah.
And I want to say, that's something that we're going to get after it here in this season.
So it's in a way it's repairing rupture, a rupture and repair that's happening internally in you.
Absolutely.
So that you can then have a better practice of rupture and repair with others. I know immediately when that thing happened with my boss and I immediately started telling myself a story. And I've since, I since have gone back and worked on the things that were being triggered, the parts of me that were being triggered. I've done a lot of work, and have repaired some of those ruptures to the extent that they can be repaired at this point, so that I can at least have enough gauze and bandages on the ruptures so that I can deal with them a little bit better. They aren't totally gone.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that one of the things I would love for our listeners to imagine, that one of our missions for this season is that when we think about ruptures that need to be repaired, as you just said, there are some ruptures that have happened to us far enough back in our history, and perhaps even involve people that might not even be alive anymore. How do we go back and what do we do about that?
Yes.
Because those people, though they're dead, they're still alive in my head, right?
Yeah.
That's still happening.
Yeah.
What do we do about those kinds of things? And we are so prone to think in terms of keeping score and benchmarks and have I done the right thing? Have I not done the right thing? We think in terms that God is paying attention to this abstract outside score sheet that's outside of me. And we don't pay that much attention to what God is actually really paying attention to, which is what kind of person am I actually becoming? So you think about athletes on the field who, they may make a mistake, they may whatever, but like any coach will tell you, certainly we want players on the field or on the court or whatever who are playing well, of course. But what coaches really want are players who are in the game, players who are working their tail off, players who are continuing to get little by little by little. But it's not just like, oh, I defend the pass better this year than I did last year. That may be true. But what's really even more true is that I've become a more effective, harder worker in practice. I'm becoming a different athlete. And so it's not just, some of it will be like, can I repair the ruptures? And as you've demonstrated with your boss, there are certain ruptures that we're going to repair. But what we're also going to discover, so these are not either or, but what we're also going to discover is that God wants to turn us into really, really effective rupture repairers. He's paying as much attention to who are we becoming. Like, are we becoming like Nehemiah, who are going to repair the breach in the wall? Are we going to become what Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount, the opening preamble? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons and daughters of God. But notice, like, I'm not just making peace between other people, other parties that are at war with each other. I first have to make peace between parts of me and other parts of me. And so this whole notion of, like, this season is as much going to be about not just how do we repair ruptures. It's going to be like in what way are we becoming increasingly more solid, more real, more, objects of durable, beautiful, creative rupture repairers.
In what ways are we going
We're going to look at it.
Yeah. In what ways are we going to be people that are taking this atrophied imagination towards repair and strengthening that imagination so it becomes so much a part of us that we are out seeking repair, that we are out seeking like rupture to repair, because it's
We're looking
because
for
it is our new imagination. We're looking for it.
Absolutely.
Now. Yeah.
Right. And remembering that we don't do this by ourselves. We don't just go off in the privacy of our own minds or our own homes or whatever. And I'm just gonna go to the weight room by myself.
Right.
No, I think of you like you're our Orange Theory man.
At the Center for Being Known conference that we were at the Connections conference that we were at last week, I had several people come up to me and say, "I'm doing Orange Theory," like sometimes I think anyway. Yeah. So yeah, but it is the thing that, and I've talked about it, the thing that I love about it is that I am able to be a stronger and be in better condition because I'm doing these workouts with people that are encouraging me to do them. I have people on either side of me on the treadmill and on the rower and on with the weights who are doing it too. They're engaged in the work as I am. And, I have a coach that's coming around and the coach is saying, good job or do this better or work on this, that kind of thing. That is, so to use that same formula in community with people who are trying to be a people that are repairing the ruptures is an exciting thing to think about.
Right.
Yeah.
And we are going to approach this topic as we have with all the seasons that we've covered in our podcast. We're going to look at it from a biblical narrative, which we're going to do in our next episode. We're going to look at it through the lens of interpersonal neurobiology, and we're going to recognize how we have an ongoing need for God to do this thing that Peter writes about in chapter 5, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 10, where Peter writes and says, "And therefore, after you have suffered for a little while, the God of all comfort, who has called you to his glory in Christ Jesus, will restore, support, strengthen, and establish you." I mean, this is what repair looks like. It is a work to restore, support, strengthen, and establish each other in the name of Jesus. And we're going to cover various forms of rupture. We call them oscillating, limit-setting, and toxic ruptures. We're going to cover all those different forms. We're also going to see over the course of our time, oddly enough, that the first rupture in the Bible was not the third chapter of the Bible. And we're going to see that the repair of rupture and its repair is necessary for the development of secure attachment. I think man, I don't like ruptures. As it turns out, we've got to have them and have them be repaired in appropriate ways for us to strengthen our relationships with one another. And then we're going to have a lot of things to say about helpful tactics for the proper repair of ruptures. And we're going to cover a lot of different forms that, and especially in those situations that, where we're wondering, is rupture even, is repair even possible here in these things? And so that just gives us a taste of what is to come, and I really can't wait to do that with you.
Yeah, me too, you, Curt. Thank you so much for coming up with this season, for thinking about the most beautiful listeners in the world and what they may need, and what I need and what you need. And thank you for doing it together with us in community. And I'm really looking forward to every episode and learning each step along the way. So thank you so much.
Right on.
Yeah.
Yeah, you bet.
All right.
So we have an application.
We do.
So we'd like for you, between now and our next episode, we'd like for you to make a list of any experiences you've had in which a rupture has been repaired. You know, it's often the case that yes, a rupture gets repaired and we just kind of go right by it. But it's really important that we take note of that and that we remember that. And what did you and the other party or parties that were involved, what do you remember that you did? What did you do that enabled that to happen? What were some of the key steps that you took to enable the repair to take place? And how did you feel when you were able to repair that rupture successfully? Where else have you known that ruptures have not been repaired? All this is part of our assignment to be writing about this.
Yep.
You're listing ruptures that have been repaired. Where else have you known ruptures that have not been repaired? And what were the factors that kept that from happening? What were we worried about? What were we afraid of? And how far back into your memory do you recall an unrepaired rupture? What would be one of the first ruptures that did not get repaired that you remember? And how has that experience influenced the story that you believe about the relationships that you currently have and how they work? And whether or not ruptures can be repaired. I want us to reflect on that, because as we answer those questions, we are going to be introduced really to the story that we are telling ourselves about rupture repair. And I'm just really hopeful, because we really believe that the story of the gospel through the biblical narrative and through neuroscience is going to help us walk into becoming professional rupture repairers over the course of our time together.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Curt. I want to just encourage you listeners to jump into the application this week and every week, because it's going to make this season so much more meaningful for you and for us together. This whole idea of repairing ruptures will have a great impact on all of us. So thank you, Curt. I love you.
Yeah, you bet.
And
love you too, man.
Those of you who are watching on YouTube, be prepared, because Amy Chell is joining
She's
us.
coming. She's coming. There.
Be prepared.
She is.
Oh my gosh.
There it is.
Orange Theory
That's
could
what
be
we were
our-
waiting for.
Orange Theory could be our sponsor. Yes. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. They should be.
They should
Yes,
be.
they should be. They should be paying us for all the times that you talk about Orange Theory. I'm so excited for this season. And so
we can tell.
you can you
Yes.
tell? Are you being facetious?
No, we can. Go
Okay,
ahead.
so I was going to say it's been a hot minute since we've been on screen together, and it has.
Yeah.
And the last time we were together, we were in person,
Yes.
which makes me think of, the most beautiful listeners in the world, which our listeners are.
Oh, totally.
How fun was it to engage with our listeners?
Oh my gosh.
Totally. Yeah.
It was the greatest.
Yeah.
It was the greatest. Yeah.
It was.
It was. It was.
I
And
mean,
so
we're
for all,
mindful. No,
yeah,
go-
I'm just saying
go.
for all of you who weren't there, like, come next year.
Come next year. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
So just so that we're clear, what we're telling you to come to next year is our annual Connections Conference, which is sponsored by the Center for Being Known, and we do a live podcast there as part of the program. And next year we're doing it again as a 2-day conference. And oh my gosh, we somehow we've got to share some testimonials from the 2 days, because
Yeah.
you know, all I'm hearing is just amazing things that people have experienced in
Yeah.
those 2 days. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, there's no, like, the Spirit was was in that building
Yeah.
and on the move, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't just mean in the space where, where it was happening, like out in the hallways where the sponsors had their tables set up, and where like you could just you sense the work of the Spirit in all these conversations that were taking place that then just poured out into the parking lot that we would then hear about the next day when people would come in about the conversations they had with their confessional communities that they were meeting for the first time. All these, anyway.
Yeah.
So Curt, you said that it wasn't part of our application. Maybe it was, but to be aware of the story that we're writing about Rupture, and and a couple of things that both of you said made me think. Okay, I don't fully or even understand the work of this and what it's not simply you ruptured. There was a rupture that you created, and I want to repair that. It is like when you said to Pep, when you brought up the rupture with your boss, that it triggered you. You were inviting her to do the work that was your work. I mean, not your work, but you know what I mean? It was your history, so it's this collaboration.
Yep.
And like that could be a reason to not share a rupture, was because you're aware of a trigger. Like, this is mine. I own this. Why would I bring it up to you? And then it makes me think of when we worked together, the three of us did some rupture repair. And Curt, while you were sharing something, you said, I understand what happened. Like, I understand the rupture. It makes great sense to me. And yet we talked about it. And so those would all be, so those would be the reasons to not share it. Like, I understand it. So why would I share it?
Yeah. Yeah. Why don't I just go to my own, private room in my mind and just do this by myself? And, some of our attachment work shows up in these moments too, because for many of our listeners, if you've grown up in homes where nobody repaired ruptures, like it doesn't even occur to you that you could repair the rupture. You don't even think consciously, oh, there was a rupture.
This is what we do.
It's not going to be repaired. Like, you're not even thinking that consciously of it. You're just automatically living as if it won't be repaired. And so then you have to burn the energy to contain the distress that you feel, but that you have, you've created a room where all that stuff goes. Just goes there automatically on a conveyor belt. But over time, eventually, that is going to start to show up in all kinds of psychiatric symptoms, behaviors, all kinds of things. It's going to show. Right.
Like, it'll come out sideways, and we won't understand it. It'll just feel bad, feel really bad.
Right.
Yeah. And this, like, being aware of our rupture experience, it's like I imagine, okay, if you were to grow up in a home where ruptures were repaired, this would be more natural. But if we weren't, then it's like, well, no, how do we do it? Why do we do it? And that's where confessional communities, where you get to practice this, it's like, this is where we get to practice it.
Yeah.
And we get to be clumsy.
Gosh. So I may have shared this story before in some previous season and episode, but my kids were probably, I don't know, 14 and 11. My daughter was 14, maybe 13. Our son's maybe 10. And it was a day in which I was in charge of getting a meal ready for the evening. And they were old enough to help me, like really help me with things, like setting the table or whatever. And Phyllis was going to be coming home later, and I don't know what she was thinking. She trusted me to get the thing ready. She's out of her mind. And so anyway, we're the bottom line is, I'm the adult, I'm the parent in the house, and I started the prep work late. And so I'm probably like 10 to 15 minutes at least behind the 8 ball relative to when Phyllis comes in. And of course, this is not going to look good because, it's like the classic story of, whatever. So anyway, I'm feeling the urgency because I started the process late, and my kids each had a role that they were playing and so forth. And I barked at Nathan, who's like 10 or 11. I barked at Nathan about him like chop, get on with something, and like complaining to him about what he was not doing like effectively enough or whatever. I mean to tell you what, my daughter Rachel stops me and she says, "Dad, I don't think Nathan's doing anything wrong. I think you're upset because you didn't start this process on time."
Oh my gosh.
The woman who now is a 34-year-old is a pastor in Nashville,
right.
and like she was already being trained to like how to discipline parishioners, right? She's already like trained. This is good pastoral training work, and I'm like, oh my gosh.
You're right.
Oh my gosh!
Like, what a gift!
Yeah, and right. Well, maybe
14-year-old daughter.
Gift was not the first word that was coming to my mind in the moment.
Right.
I was, like, gift this, young lady, and but it's kind of like, my gosh, I mean, like we raised you to do this, daggone it.
Yeah.
And there it is.
Yeah.
And and so like I had to, like, you're right. I screwed this up. And the thing is, it's not just a rupture between me and Nathan.
Yeah.
It's an impending rupture between me and my wife because I was right. Because like I see all the ruptures. I see all the ruptures for which I am now solely responsible. But I'm also barking at my son in my daughter's earshot. Mm-hmm. So it's like the rupture isn't just with him. I don't just have a repair to make with him. I got a repair with her. Mm-hmm. Like, you're right. I'm blaming your brother for something that is my responsibility because I'm afraid that your mom's going to be upset with me when she and you're right. And like and you saw like all like the right, all because we're trying to train our children up, to train them up in the way of the Lord, so that when they're old they will not depart from it. Daggone it. And these things happen, but to your point, that if we don't, and now, thanks be to God. I mean, for what I am aware of, they are people who like, they are quick. They keep short accounts, and they get after it, and they like if something, and it's still like with us, even with us when it happens. But they tell stories about with their friendships and so forth, and they tell stories of how their friends, their young adult friends, like, don't know what to do.
Yeah.
When one of the two of them come to say, "Hey, I need to talk about what happened yesterday in that conversation." Right. Yeah. Yeah. They're and now, they're like adult professional versions of what they were like in my kitchen when they were 14 and 11. They're forces to be reckoned with. And yet they also report that when they have these conversations with their friends, that their friends are, they're always surprised, because it's like it's because they're Nathan and Rachel, like, they don't let people off the mat. They don't let them run into the shadows. I mean, like, if they do, they might. You can't stop them if they're not willing to. They've had those conversations too, where people are not willing to stay in the room and do the repair work. More like Adam and Eve, they're going to run into the woods when God comes calling. But I think it's also, they've been examples to me of what it means to be people who look for repairs to rupture in their worlds.
And I love the imagining what this work will look like, imagining that we have permission to do this work and permission to be clumsy and
Yeah. And for all of our parents out there who, like, again, when we do parent work with folks, we say, look, your kids, we've said this here before, the only way that you don't screw up your kids is just don't ever have them. And your kids are like, they don't need you to be perfect. They need you to take initiative. They need you to be people of loving kindness. They need you to be mindful, not perfectly so. And they need you to be able to repair ruptures. That's what they need. Mm-hmm. Look, in this world, you will have ruptures. Like, ruptures are part of the deal. We live as if like, oh, I can arrange my life. I'm going to arrange my life in such a way that like I'll never have them. And so that like it feels like an aberration when I do. Like, no, in this world, like that's the real world we live in. And when we repair ruptures with our children that we've created, look, they're already in distress when we've done it. But when we come for them, we let them know that like, oh my goodness, you can have something distressing happen and you live to tell about it. And you can find joy on the other side of this. And you begin to construct a remembered future in which when hard things happen, those hard things become opportunities for even greater connection, deeper joy. Yeah. There'll be more we'll say about all that as we move forward.
Yeah.
Good.
It is going to be a great season. Already is.
Yeah.
I'm excited. All right. Anything else, Amy?
All right, guys.
Off?
Nope, you didn't. It's great.
All right.
I'm excited.
Man.
It's great to be with
Love
you
you
guys.
guys.
Yeah.
Love you guys. Next time.
This podcast is produced by Curt Thompson, Pepper Sweeney, and myself, Amy Chella. Audio production and editing is by Keaton Simons. Video production and editing is done by Mark Gould. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on social media at BeingKnownPod. If you like this podcast, tell a friend. If you love this podcast, tell everyone you know. And please like, rate, and review wherever you listen. Be well, be known.